Hi everyone, welcome to As I Lay Reading, my brand new booktube channel. This is my very first video, so if you happen to be watching this somehow, I really want to extend an extra special welcome because this is my very first time recording. And I want to thank you for somehow finding me on this incredibly tiny corner of YouTube. So I thought it would be good to start out by just talking about maybe what kind of books I like to read, what kind of books you might expect to see on this channel. I think mostly I have usually read older books, not for any particular reason, just that those are the famous ones that I've heard of before. And I've been making a real concerted effort lately to try to read more contemporary writing, which is one of the inspirations for this channel. I'm kind of in like a transitional place with my reading, and I thought it would be nice to have a place to sort of discuss with other people, have a tete-a-tete, so to speak, and have a place to record my thoughts in my reading life as I transition to sort of different types of reading. I also generally like to read mostly literary fiction. I also like nonfiction a lot. In fact, I used to kind of mostly read nonfiction, and a few years ago I sort of discovered fiction, and that was really eye-opening for me. I still love my nonfiction though. I think generally I tend to read literary fiction, but I mean, I guess occasionally I might go for like a mystery or something like that. But generally I would say mostly in the literary tradition. And yeah, I thought I have my list here from the story graph of my 5-star reads, at least the ones since I started tracking my reading. And I thought I might just go over those, give some of my thoughts on those so that you can get a little bit of a taste of what kinds of literature I'm reading and see, if you'd be interested in the stuff that I'm reading. So the first book I have here is Murdoch's The Bell. This is definitely a 5-star read for me, and what I mean by 5-star read, I guess, is just books that I think I would be happy to reread over and over again. That I could just, desert island books, like the kinds of books that you never get tired of, that you're happy to reread for the rest of your life. With The Bell, it's an interesting one because I first read it when I was probably a little bit too young. I read it in high school, and one of the main themes of this book is kind of age versus innocence. And I think I didn't really quite, I was a little too young to understand it. And just recently I reread it, and I have my little notes that I make in my book here, and it was funny to see that I reread it exactly 10 years later. So that was interesting. And Iris Murdoch has been one of my favorite writers for a very long time. She sort of embodies, I think, what I think is sort of like the best kind of fiction. It's philosophical, it's introspective, and it really utilizes the medium of writing. It has not just interesting writing in terms of syntax and diction, but she really leverages the fact that we can jump from different minds and see the insides of different people, and we see how people misunderstand one another compared to what they were actually thinking. In terms of The Bell, this is a story, it's a typical Iris Murdoch story where you sort of get a group of people who are sort of thrown together in an isolated environment. You stir them together for a while, and then pressure builds and then eventually explodes. This one is sort of like that, but takes place in a lay community near a convent. It would take a lot to sort of describe the plot, but what I think is really interesting about it is it's not just the naked plot that's interesting. usually with Iris Murdoch, it's so much about the atmosphere that she's able to build in her books. There's just this sort of palpable tension where even the simplest descriptions feel like they take on this sort of power or interesting aura where things are familiar, things are made strange in a way. And I've always really admired that ability that she has. There's this sort of almost tangible feeling that there's this, I don't know, sort of a strangeness in the air. And The Bell is no different. And I think with The Bell, it's a really good place to start with Iris Murdoch because it's just a rip-roaring read. There's no part that's not interesting or fun. You're never waiting for the plot to pick up again. It's got a great plot. The only thing I'd say about this book is it's a little bit less overtly philosophical than a lot of Iris Murdoch's other work. It doesn't just sort of go off on a philosophical soliloquy at random points, but that actually also, I think, makes it an easier entryway into her work. I've not read all of her work. I've never read, for instance, I think most people know her for The Sea, which I think is the book that won the Booker Prize, and I've never actually read that one. I've read Under the Net and The Unicorn and The Green Knight, The Bell, and I think a couple of others, but I've never read The Sea. But this one is so good. Actually, as I'm talking about it, I'm starting to realize maybe I would like to do just, separate reviews on some of these books. But this book is really great. I would love to read this over and over. If you've never read it before, I'm jealous. I wish I could read it for the first time again. Yeah, I might do a separate video on this book, actually, or some of the other books that are here. The next book, I'll try to be a little more concise from now on, is Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, depends on, what etymology you use, I guess. And I guess you couldn't really quite call this a book. It's more like an extended poem. And it was the first book of poetry I ever read that was alliterative poetry. And I loved it. I was just shocked at how beautiful this was. It's hard to put down, actually. It's so gorgeous. I also just really loved the story. I loved the idea of, sort of the fearful knight, the imperfect knight, the knight seeking perfection rather than embodying perfection. And it was sort of my first experience or exposure to Arthurian legends, at least in their originals. And to this day, I'm just a sucker for anything Arthur. Now, I just love all the Arthurian legends. I love the pathos of Gawain, and there's just something that really gets to you. The pathos of Gawain's his endeavors, his endeavor to be better, to seek out virtue. I really like that. And I just had here, it's also kind of a neat piece of writing to get into because there's so many different translations, and I thought it was kind of neat. I picked up this one. I thought it was cool that J.R.R. Tolkien actually did his own translation. I haven't read this one yet, but it's on my list, and it's always cool. On the one hand, you feel sad that you can't access the text in the original, but in another way, it's a cool way to sort of encounter the story over and over again, I think, when you can keep reading different translations. So yeah, that's on my list, and I love Gawain and the Green Knight. The next book I've got here is a work of philosophy. I've got Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. I think Hannah Arendt is a very interesting writer. She's sort of maybe infamous for some people because of her loose, sort of popular style. But I think because of the things she's writing about, she's writing about the politics of her moment, living in that moment, witnessing things that are affecting her philosophy right at that time. I think it's interesting that she sort of writes in this journalistic style. And I really feel that this book I could read again and again because I think it is hard sometimes to conceive of what she means. So in the human condition, she's mostly talking about the division between human activities. So we've got labor, work, and what she calls the Vita Activa. And so labor is sort of the things you do just to keep your life running, just to stay alive, washing the dishes, cooking, whatever it is you do just to keep your life running. It's not really meaningful. And once you do those things, they sort of disappear from the world. The fact that you washed the dishes 3 weeks ago mattered then, but doesn't matter that now. Work is a different kind of human activity in which you, it's the world of artifice, the artificial world that human beings make around themselves, crafting items, creating things. So if you make a table, you build a table, that table will still be around years later, and collectively we sort of build up our human world of things, material things and objects through our work. So it's sort of a step above labor. And then we have what she calls the Vita Activa, like the active life, and that's the realm of freedom, of true human freedom and creativity. And infamously, she's not very clear on what things constitute the Vita Activa. She uses the example of Pericles' funeral oration, and that's kind of her main example of what that would be. And what I think is interesting about it is the idea that it's what constitutes the Vita Activa is when you speak about something that's beyond your everyday life. So it's not, for her, politics is not how much does bread cost, or or I guess maybe a more contemporary example would be how much is gas at the pump right now. It's something more elevated than that. It's talking about what values do we hold dear in this society? How do we conceive of how our society works and how we should live? And I thought that was very interesting. I really would like to read more Hannah Arendt. This is the first of her books that I've read. So I would really like to read The Origins of Totalitarianism and Eichmann in Jerusalem. But I think this one also deserves a reread. I really liked her conception of the three types of human activity. And, even if it's a little vague, I don't really hold that against her. I think that's sort of not a flaw, but sort of part of the point of how she writes. So this is a great book. I really liked it. Next on here, I've got Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. This is an example of some of the more contemporary writing I've been trying to fit in. It was my first experience with magical realism, and I just loved it. I really thought it was fantastic. This was a book I could just barely put down. I stayed up late reading it. I just couldn't get enough of it. It was really magical for me. I just loved his style. And the funny thing is, I think long ago I read the Satanic Verses, but it just didn't have the same punch as Midnight's Children for me. So this is one that's about, India, and it's coming into its own independence in the late 1940s, I think 1947 or so. And it's about the Midnight's Children, the children that were born on the very night of India's independence. And since it's magical realism, those children get sort of special powers, like the main character, he gets telepathic powers, but it's not really like a superhero novel. It's just sort of meant to sort of stand in allegorically for the politics of India as it was coming into independence. And I just thought it was so fun, so interesting, so addictive. I really enjoyed it. And this is one of the contemporary books that really got me interested in more modern writing. And I could definitely read this happily multiple times. Next, I've got two books here that I don't actually have in hard copy. They're somewhere in the house, but I couldn't find them. One was The Essential Thucydides. So that's excerpts from the history of the Peloponnesian War. And I read that in a very interesting way that I really recommend, which is I read it alongside the Gospels. Um, and, we are always thinking of ourselves as both Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian. But I think reading the Gospels next to Thucydides was really interesting because it sort of can't help but set each one off from the other because they just have such a fundamentally different worldview. The realpolitik, one might even say the cynicism of the negotiations in Thucydides, next to sort of the idealism of Jesus, it really brings to the fore how radical the Gospels actually are. And I think we sort of have become blind to that now. But when you situate it differently in the ancient world, you can sort of see the radicalism of the Gospels. And sort of the sophistication of the Greeks, the politics of the Greeks. And, it's got the Melian dialogue that, I believe it's something like the strong do as they will, the weak do as they must. That comes from Thucydides. And it was sort of, I've really found it fascinating. And I'm not generally someone who's very interested in war, but the Thucydides was really interesting. And it was made all the more interesting by having it be offset or highlighted by also reading it along with the Gospels. And that was a really interesting experience. The other book I don't have a hard copy of right now is Arcadia by Tom Stoppard. Not a book, it's a play, and obviously not his most famous play, but I loved this. First, I think it's just one of the most successful efforts I've ever seen to sort of to popularly write about sort of concepts in math and physics. He goes over sort of chaos theory and the idea of iteration, where you feed a number into a function, and then whatever number you get from that function, you feed it in again. And I think it's a real accomplishment to be able to write about that in sort of a popular, interesting, compelling way. But on top of that, it's just a hilarious play. And also, it's really genuinely touching. I just adore this play. It's about it's got a lot of different themes, but essentially it's about a young girl in the 19th century who's sort of a genius. She's a proto-genius, so she's very young, something like 14 or something, I think, when it begins. And it's about her and her tutor, who sort of increasingly recognizes her genius, I guess, and she comes up with this interesting idea about chaos theory and how to, I don't know, how to sort of, it's hard to describe. And then we fast forward and we see sort of the same family several generations later, and they're sort of researching and writing books. Various people are researching and writing books on this previous period that we were seeing earlier in the play. I've sort of described that very inarticulately, but one of the other themes that I find really interesting is how quickly knowledge is lost and whether or not that knowledge can be recovered. So the people who are trying to write histories of what happened earlier, they make mistakes, and we know that they're making mistakes because we've seen it as the present earlier on in the play. But the play also introduces these ideas of you don't really have to worry that her math ideas were lost, because then those same ideas were rediscovered. So these ideas are sort of universal and they'll always come back. There's a lot in this play. It's a really short play, but I didn't even touch on like most of the themes. And so I just thought it was a genius play, and I really like it. Frankly, a lot more than Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. I like that play too, but this was a really, really great play. So those are the two books I couldn't find my physical copies. I'll try to go a little faster. I only have a few left. So the next one is maybe a little predictable, I guess, but yeah, the Republic by Plato. I mean, what can I say? It's got the allegory of the cave. It discusses, different conceptions of justice. Is justice the might of the stronger? Is it what we owe to one another, that we owe benefits to our friends and I guess demerits to our enemies? What's a perfect city? It's all in there. I mean, I think Whitehead was not exaggerating when he said that all philosophy is just a footnote to Plato. And yeah, I mean, I've read this a couple of times and I still feel like I don't, you can never extract everything from this. And I do think that it also is written rather artfully. The fact that it is a dialogue, I think, is not something to be ignored, but something to be celebrated. And I just find it really interesting. I mean, it sounds sort of corny, but like very often I'll think of a sort of a problem or something, and then I'll realize, oh, right, that's kind of already been covered in the Republic, so I can just go back and have a look. And I just think that this is a never-ending source of interest. So, very good book, if you can call it that. The next book I have here, one of my very favorites, and a rather cool edition of it too, if I might say so, is actually Jane Eyre. I love Jane Eyre. First read it when I was about 15 and have read it several times since, and it always hits me a little bit differently depending on where I am in my life. I really like this edition because I think so often Jane Eyre is seen as just a simplistic romance, especially if you've not read it. But I actually see it much more as a Bildungsroman, and I really like that the cover of this book covers her childhood, and it really captures the feeling, the gothic, sort of grim feeling of the book, which I think is much more representative than advertising it as some sort of just simple romance. This edition is actually really cool too because it's from 1943, Random House, and I don't know about you, but when I think of 1943, I don't think of beautiful book editions and pieces of art being produced, and I just think it's really cool that even when, all these other events were going on in the world, that people were still producing things of beauty like this. So I really like this edition. So I've got 3 more. If you've stuck around, thank you. The next book I've got on here, another kind of obvious one, I guess, The Iliad by Homer. I've got a bunch of editions of this. I got a little bit obsessed with getting different translations for a while, but this is the nicest looking one. This is, I believe, Alexander Pope. And I've got Fagles and Lattimore and Lombardi and all sorts of things. I think what I love about the Iliad is, I'll say something controversial right off the bat in my very first video. I think most people sort of prefer the Odyssey to the Iliad. I really prefer the Iliad. And I think it's for precisely the reasons that people like the Odyssey more. The Odyssey is kind of celebrated as a wonderful, fanciful fairy tale. And I actually like the Iliad because of its not being a fairy tale. It deals with very real problems. Odysseus, I think his problems are sort of win-win. Like either be a, hero and win the day, or be immortal, I guess, and hang out and sleep with nymphs, and it's all sort of fun and games. I think Achilles has a really, really difficult choice to make. I think he's dealing with very real and serious human problems that we all deal with in different ways. I think the idea of having eternal fame versus long life is an actually difficult problem, unlike Odysseus's sort of fake dilemma. And I think the ending with Priam is extremely touching. I mean, one of the most moving scenes in all of Western literature, I think, happens in the Iliad. And I think the Iliad is tragically overlooked by people. And I think the fact that it is such a tough and difficult world that these soldiers inhabit is part of the appeal, is part of what makes it such a moving piece of literature, rather than running around and having little fairy tale jaunts with the gods or whatever. So I really like the Iliad. So that's one of my other picks. Next one, I guess, is again maybe a bit of a cliche, but these are 5-star reads, so they're gonna be. I think that a lot of the canon is canonical for a reason. So I've got here Ulysses by James Joyce. This was quite a project. It took me several months to read, but absolutely worth it. I think it's an amazing piece of writing craft. It's really funny. It's really touching, genuinely touching. I think the other thing is, like I was saying, I think about the Iris Murdoch, that what I like about this is it really takes advantage of the medium of writing. As in, I love the experimentation. I love the fact that we jump between people's sort of still percolating thoughts. I just think it's, the apotheosis of artistry, if I can be so bold. This is not the edition I read. This is a cool facsimile edition, actually, of the first edition of Ulysses. And what I think is really neat about that, I've left the cellophane, is that what it's called? I've left the vinyl cover on, so let me take it off, your protective cover. What I think is really cool about this is I'd always heard of how fragile and rushed to press the first edition was, but this can really, really emphasizes, this is just paper and nothing else here, just paper. And I think that's so cool. And when I reread Ulysses, I did not read the original 1922 edition, which is what this is, but I think I'll read this edition with all the errors and printing mistakes and everything. I think that would be a very cool way to reread Ulysses sometime soon. And the last book, that was a lot. The last book I've got here is The Name of the Rose. This is a little bit, like I was saying, I sometimes like mystery novels. And this one is also, again, like something that's a little bit more contemporary. And this is just a wonderful book. I think Umberto Eco is tremendously gifted. Not only is he just extremely well informed about the medieval period. I believe he was a history professor, wasn't he? But he's also a wonderful writer. One thing that's really amazing about this book is I read it a few years ago now, and what I think is interesting about this book is when I have memories of certain scenes in this book, I actually have visual memories because he was so good at crafting an image. I'll actually kind of see the church that he was describing and things like that. That happens to me very, very rarely. So I think that's just, that's representative of what a great writer he is. And this one is sort of about, there's an abbey in the Middle Ages, I don't know, maybe the 14th century or so. And there's sort of a man of science, or he's sort of a Sherlock Holmes stand-in. You could sort of call him almost sort of a contemporary man of science who is a monk. And at this abbey, people keep getting mysteriously killed. So he needs to investigate why these people are getting killed. But that really doesn't really sum up what the book is. It's one of those books where, yes, I guess technically it's a mystery, but it's more of an excuse to look around at this place, at this society, and to sort of, for us as the readers, to sort of voyeuristically look at what this place is like. And I just loved this book. I would love to reread it. So yeah, those are all my 5-star reads that I'll discuss for today. If you've made it this far, thank you. This was a lot longer than I expected it to be. But yes, thank you so much for watching. And if you like any of these books, let me know. If you don't like any of these books, let me know. I'd love discussion in either direction. And thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you here again soon. So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.